we're built to walk uphill. And when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's the uphill climb that it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. So almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, and that's to be filled with the Spirit of God, by the way, because that's what enthusiasm means. That's experienced in relationship to a goal. And so in some sense, and this is part of the religious enterprise, you want a goal that you can never attain, right? So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. And that's why the highest levels of virtue and goal are in some sense transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month and depressed and aimless and goalless. You want a horizon of ever expanding possibility. And so it does happen to people because they've staked their soul on the attainment of an instrumental goal. And it can be a pretty high order goal. It was in your case. But then you think, well, now I'm there. Now what? Well, the answer can't be, well, I'm going to live in the lap of luxury and never have to leave the face. What do you want to be? A giant infant with a gold bottle? You never have to do anything but lay in your back and suck. It's like, well, you see the problem with that as a conceptualization. It's no, you want to be like an active warrior moving uphill with your sword in hand. And that's dynamic. That's exciting. And that's why so many young men disappear into video games. That's all acted out in the video game. So they have to act that out in their own life. Belief is what you stake your actions on. Well, and there's choice in it too, and that's faith, I suppose. So, for example, faith isn't the decision to believe things that are preposterous. And there's a substantial amount of confusion about that, I would say, in the religious community and in the non-religious community. So, for example, you can decide that it's better to tell the truth than not to. And it's a decision because you're not basing your action on your observations of the outcome of the actions that stem from that decision. You've decided to look at things in a certain way. So I could say, I've decided to do what I can to say what I believe to be true, because I have decided that, to believe that, to assume that, to have faith in the proposition that there's no better way forward than the truth, no matter what it looks like. And that's the thing. That's why the decision of faith is necessary, because it gives you a particular angle on the evidence. You know, maybe I say something I believe to be true and I get in trouble. And then I might say, well, the fact that I got in trouble indicates that saying what's true wasn't the right thing to do. It's like, no, not necessarily. It might be that saying what I believe to be true was the right thing to do, despite the proximal outcome. You have to make decisions about how you're going to interpret the facts. You have to make decisions about that. Those are decisions of faith. And so then you decide what you have faith in. Well, here's some things that I would like to have faith in if I could manage it, if I could be strong enough to manage it, let's say. I'd like to assume that existence is worthwhile and that we should all work for its furtherance and its benefit. And you say, well, is that true? Well, there's a lot of suffering in life. There's a lot of suffering associated with consciousness. You could make the case that there's so much suffering that the whole game is suspect. And that's a valid claim, but it's not a claim I want to make. So I'm not going to live out that claim. I'm going to try to live out the alternate claim. All things considered, I think that would be better. You could say, well, you're justified in altering falsehoods if it's expedient. That's why people lie, and people do lie, and so obviously they believe that to some degree because otherwise they wouldn't lie. But you could decide that you're not going to do that because that's wrong. Well, that's not so much an observation as a proposition. I'm going to live my life as if that's wrong. And I've derived both of those principles, let's say, the wish for the furtherance of being and the idea that truth is redemptive. Those are fundamental Judeo-Christian propositions, maybe the most fundamental Judeo-Christian propositions. They seem to me to be valid, or valid enough to stake my life on. And that's the decision of faith. What are you going to stake your life on? That's manifested in action. It's not manifested in your claims about the explicit contents of your descriptions of the world. We kind of experience life as if we're tossed into it, thrown into it. You know, you're male and not female. You're Hindu and not Christian. You're tall and not short. You have an arbitrary range of talents and an arbitrary range of limitations, none of which, in some sense, you chose. It's the cards you're dealt. Now, some of those are cards of privilege. You know, maybe you're born intelligent. Maybe you're born symmetrical. Maybe you're born healthy. Maybe you're born into a culture where it's much easier not to be absolutely deprived. Maybe your parents are rich. And so all of that, in some sense, is unearned. Now, along with that comes a good dose of existential guilt. Because at the same time, and this is true for anyone, regardless of their cultural background, the ground we walk on is soaked in the blood of historical atrocity. And so that's on you because, you know, people think, well, who's the Nazi? Well, it's the fascist, or who's the radical communist? It's the radical left-wing ideologue. And the fundamental truth of the matter is that's best dealt with as a spiritual matter, is the adversary is within, really, most profoundly. And so you have to take the responsibility for that historical atrocity onto yourself. The way you pay for your privilege is with your virtue. I mean that most particularly. You have these opportunities and this existential guilt. And the way you expiate that and atone is by doing your best to live the best possible life you can manage, to speak the truth, to treat people with respect, to abide by the principles of the dignity of the individual, and to put your house in order. And that's how you pay for your unearned privilege. All of us. And we all have our privileges and our curses. You know? All of us have that. That's why it's not useful to be envious of people. You know, you're a young man, you see someone drive by in a Ferrari with a blonde, and you think, my God, he's got everything. And, you know, the woman in the car is a prostitute who's got a cocaine addiction, and her life is just one catastrophe after another. And he's had to lie and cheat his way into this position, and he's afraid that everything's going to come crashing down on him, and that's what you're jealous of. And it's just not that profound. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough, and your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better.